Greetings. Don't forget to hit the bell for all notifications if you haven't done so already. Many millennia ago, the planet was given an injection. They injected a full syringe of poison called lies. As a result, the planet fell ill and changed beyond recognition. The unconnected has united, the inhabitants of the planet, who always speak only the truth, on the one hand, and the aliens, woven from lies, lying with every exhalation, on the other. Here is such a symbiosis, one believes everything, the other always lies. Superglue formula. Many people ask, why, with such an off-scale level of spiritual and technical development, did the Aryans lose to some parasites standing far below on the evolutionary ladder? The fact is that in an ideal society there was no lie, we did not know about it, so we simply could not identify it, ideal conditions for capture. You can't just take and hide the truth, instead you need to come up with a lie. To invent means to create new information. And now a huge problem stands in the way of creatures, they are not able to create by their nature. The planet is huge, which means that the lie must be total, but how to create such an array of completely new information without creative abilities? How did the creatures solve the problem? And it's very simple, you don't need to create a new one, if you turn the old inside out exactly the opposite, in other words, turn the world upside down, and where there's no way to turn it over, then just change the concepts. Today all media operate on the same principle, let's call it Changeling. Example of flip number 1. Talented, a man with money, because a few centuries ago money talents went around, so they buried it in the ground, hid it. A rich person is a person who is close to God in terms of his level of development. Now these two concepts have changed places, nothing new has been invented, a classic shifter. There are a lot of such inverted words in the modern language: freak, legality, fool, antiquity, national, bride, vodka, gold, devil, beer, secured, holy fool, and so on. Example number 2. The real name of our planet is geography, geo-images, geometry, measurement of geoplanes, geology, geostones, logos is a sacred crystal for connection with the solar, geodesy, measurement of geo-areas, geopolitics, and so on. Our language has 85 words with the root geo. All the shifters described are nonsense compared to what happened several thousand years ago. The global lie was supposed to start with a global shifter on a planetary scale, namely, with the de-energization of the central processor of the planet, its core called solar. Solar is not just a true living luminary in the center of our planet, it is the core, the brain, the control center for all biological and energy processes on Earth. As in the womb, a brain is laid in the skull of a child, so when creating the planets, such a luminary is initially laid. Solar cannot be destroyed, otherwise the whole planet will die, so it was simply isolated from the biosphere, like a scarf is thrown over a cage with a parrot. The Greys built a giant multi-layered shell around the solar, and he was trapped in it like a hazelnut in its shell. As a result, we got such an opaque ball, hereinafter referred to as a shell, so the gods closed the solar with a solid opaque sphere, along which, in addition to toy planets and stars, 2 artificial lamps drive, the day Aurora and the night moon, not the moon, but the moon, you say. No guys. In fairy tales you will not find any moon, it was the moon that the ancestors called the night luminary, regardless of its phase. So what is the moon? Moon, this is long the name of the dragon in Chinese mythology. Lun is the name of the shell that swallowed up the true luminary. By the way, agree, Lun and moon are very similar to hearing. It is not known when we borrowed the moon from the Chinese, but the Greeks called the shell Olympus, and even left us a bunch of myths about how the gods mocked mortals in their cruel Olympic games. According to the rules of the shifter, they are now passed off as sports. Our ancestors nicknamed the shell Dia, and the devil himself is at the head of this whole gang. Now, according to the rules of the shifter, the creatures have mixed all the concepts, like cards in a deck. Dia became some kind of mythical planet. Mount Olympus was named in Greece. The moon has turned into the moon. It is easy to explain this to a child, because you write on a white sheet, but in adults the head overheats. To summarize, Solar is closed and the planet is now controlled by a new supercomputer of creatures with a fundamental difference from Solar. It sets the planet in cycles. Now winter and summer, day and night, appeared, and plants, animals and people began to be born and die of old age. The ideal world collapsed, and lies began to permeate the entire biosphere of the planet. This was the creation of the world 75-24 years ago on the one hand and the great defeat of the Aryans on the other. Immortality has left humanity has been replaced by a strange form of life, mortal people. Carbon to replace silicon. There is a carbon-based form of life on Earth now, but while the solar was shining, the entire biosphere of the planet had a silicon base. It should be noted that there was less gravity, so the representatives of flora and fauna were truly gigantic in size. The Bible generously shares this grain of truth with us. Genesis, chapter 6. At that time there were giants on the earth. Skeleton remains found all over the world also confirm the gigantism of that time. As soon as the solar was closed, gravity changed several times, and under the influence of day's photon emitters, all living things began to fall into suspended animation. If our carbon body begins to decompose, then the silicon bodies turn into stone. Fleeing from petrification, the remnants of the Aryans put on helmets and armor that shielded the silicon bodies from the deadly radiation of lunar generators, but the vast majority of the inhabitants, hundreds of billions, died. They were petrified, like 100% of animals and plants. Today, artesian wells are drilled to the so-called aquifer. These are stone layers underground. They are the dead silicon world. The planet is teeming with petrified remains of animals and plants, but scientists say that this dandelion leaf is petrified from time to time. So it was with the silicon life form. Now the bodies are carbon. Every 300 years the planet is burned to the ground. Billions of tons of corpses need to go somewhere, so the liquid part settles in snowcaps at the poles, and the carbon part turns into oil. Shell functions so, in the shell, by the name of Dia, the devil with his numerous retinue was comfortably located, which began the redistribution of the free world into a prison farm. Our first defeat was the isolation of our planet's core, the solara, which illuminated the surface 24 hours a day, year-round. As soon as the generators of day were launched, the inhabitants of the planet were given a status meaning set in an endless cycle of service to the gods. The second defeat is the destruction of Lely. Lely was called a single living organism from all animals, plants and people connected to the solar. The film Avatar perfectly reveals the image of Lely as a perfectly balanced ecosystem. As a result of the destruction of Lely, there was a complete replacement of the immortal silicon life form with a carbon one. All plants from clover to baobabs and all animals from mosquitoes to whales have been recreated by the criminal gang of the gods. Lelia has been replaced by nature. The only species that survived the creation of the new world is the white race, although the bodies had to be very heavily transformed. Otherwise, Fada's photon radiation would have killed us. The third defeat, they launched a virus, which caused the DNA to mutate and only 2 helices remained in its molecule. As a result, at the age of 13 to 15, the virus switches on the reboot of the hormonal system and starts the mode of self-destruction through slow aging. Later, they split our brains into 2 hemispheres, inserting the bump that adorns the entrance to the Vatican Library, and also stuffed new senseless organs into the bodies. Our mind was divided into consciousness and subconsciousness, so 97% of the processes of our own body are not available to us. Fourth defeat. The last thing that was taken away from us was our memory. When incarnated in the body of a baby, no one remembers anything. This is the result of a supercomputer called Fada, an artificial self-learning intelligence that controls a sequence of life scenarios for all creatures on the planet. In other words, Fada paralyzes free will and forcibly imposes the hellish scenarios of the gods, that is, fate. Fate and Fada are consonant, don't you think? Wikipedia writes, fatality is inevitability, inevitability. Inevitability, predestination, inevitability. Fada, fate and inevitability are synonyms. What a coincidence, isn't it? Fada is a network, of which the internet is a part, that not only connects all scenarios with each other, but also captures our spirits so that after death we could not escape from prison even in electroplasmic bodies. As a result of the fourth laws, the gods convinced us that life is called a game and you need to constantly play it. They even promised a gingerbread upon their return, if we agree to entertain them in the earthly hell, and at the same time feed them geva. These games were called Olympic. They even promised a gingerbread upon their return, if we agree to entertain them in the earthly hell, and at the same time feed them geva. These games were called Olympic. In the spirit of the shifter, the Olympic Games are now called sports, and Fada became the second fallen moon 13,000 years ago. Wow, how convenient, what you can't explain, just call it the fallen moon, business something, hey neighbor. And what are your worn out tires doing in my Benz? Are you completely crazy? Those are fallen moons? Ah, well then. Fifth, lest, defeat. It hasn't arrived yet, but it's very close. Complete destruction of the human gene. Considering that the meat grinder has accelerated dramatically, we have a couple of years left. In such a short moment, people cannot wake up in time, which means that if there is no intervention of a third force, the chances are 0. But if it does, then we will witness a truly rare performance, because the liberation of this world will begin with the destruction of the sky. Take care of yourself, Ray. Love you.